Ever wonder if Brian Griffin, Quahog's walking, talking, wine-sipping canine could survive a day in court? After digging into his most outrageous and illegal moments, it's clear that Brian's done more than just chase his tail. He's chased trouble, and lots of it. From minor mischief to crimes so outrageous, they'd make even Lois reconsider her loyalty. Let's jump right in. Starting off with the smallest of charges, but definitely not the least of Brian's crimes in American Gigolo, Brian attempts to save an attractive young woman whose car is crashed into the ocean. But after finding out she has a baby, he just lets them both drown.
Hurry! I can't hold it!
Okay, let me just unstrap my baby.
Slipping, sorry.
I mean, it's not even surprising to expect something like this from Brian, but although he wasn't responsible for the crash itself, according to Rhode Island laws, failing to assist someone in an emergency can get you charged with a petty misdemeanor. And for that, and being a pretty big jerk, Brian will be looking at a $500 fine and 6 months in jail. Brian's most petty instance of misbehavior takes place early on in season 2 of the show, where he goes a bit too far with his love for burying shiny objects in his yard. In the episode Love Thy Trophy, Quahog's yearly Harvest Festival parade with floats takes place.
Quahog prepares for its annual Harvest Festival parade.
The float that best captures this year's theme wins Quahog's coveted golden clam.
Weirdly enough, the float built by Spooner Street ends up taking the title. Now everyone starts arguing over who gets to keep the trophy, so Brian suggests an idea, to have it placed on the road. The next day, the whole neighborhood is horrified over the trophy being missing and start guessing who the perpetrator might be. Which, we find out at the end of the episode, is none other than our beloved Brian himself. While nobody ever finds out who stole the trophy, and Brian gets away with it, it still counts as theft. And in Rhode Island, where they're situated, Brian would be looking at a fine of $500 and 1 year in jail. I'm pretty sure Brian would reconsider his love for burying things after this. Now, Brian never lets an opportunity slide where he's able to exhibit his passion for activism. And in the episode Christmas Crime, in classic Brian fashion, Brian is rebelling against Christmas, claiming it focuses too much on consumerism.
Just what we need. A religious display on government property. Can't believe this is what my tax dollars are paying for.
With everybody else trying to show him the good side of the holiday spirit. At a party at the Drunken Clam, Brian is getting drunk while everyone is busy annoying him with their festive spirit. This causes Brian to go on another drunken rant against Christmas and storm off.
Money! It's all about money!
Is Christmas really so awful?
Brian, completely wasted, gets in his car and proceeds to drive away, finally crashing into the town's nativity display. Brian doesn't get away with this though, as in a rare case of justice, Brian goes to jail for his actions and ultimately changes his views on Christmas after having to spend Christmas Eve alone in jail. Now, even though Brian is freed early, he won't be this lucky in the real world. Not only is he guilty of DUI, but destruction of property as well. And for both of these combined, he'll be looking at a fine of $1,000. 60 hours of community service, 2 years in jail, and suspension of his license as well. Jeez, that's a handful. Maybe he should have just believed in the festive season in the first place. But, oh well, Brian can just avoid being a criminal if he just somehow stops being so impulsive. But we all know there are more chances of the earth being flat than that happening. In This Little Piggy, Brian and Stewie attend a folk music festival where they meet a hippie girl who offers to have a threesome with them. Right before it's about to happen, she overdoses on cocaine. Afterwards, Brian and Stewie both dump her body in a pile of other dead hippies. Sometimes you just have to stop and think how their brain even functions, but oh well. Now, not only did they fail to report that to the authorities, but they even moved the body from its original resting place, which is a crime. And for that, Brian will be charged with 5 years in prison and get slammed with a fine of $10,000. This one might get a little contradictory, because we will be charging Brian with animal cruelty. I'm sure you can see the irony in that. The first example of this is when he deliberately runs over a squirrel, which, unbeknownst to him, also traumatizes Stewie. Brian's eternal feud with squirrels doesn't end there though. In Boys and Squirrels, Brian and Stewie decide to take care of a baby squirrel that falls off a tree after Peter cuts it with his chainsaw. And after nursing it back to health, Brian ends up violently mauling the baby squirrel to death. In a separate instance during a date in Love Blactually, he mauls a rabbit at a pet store. He also hires a hitman to kill Quagmire's cat, Principessa. Now, Brian is a dog at the end of the day, and your dog would have chased after a squirrel the same way as he did. But we're charging him for his crimes as a resident of Quahog, and for his brutal actions against his own species, accounting as animal cruelty. Brian will be getting locked up for 8 years and get treated with a $4,000 fine on top of it. We can only hope that's enough to tame the dog in him. Brian Griffin's already in hot water, facing 16 and a half years of prison time and $16,000 in fines that he's definitely not paying off writing novels. But things are about to get even worse. We're digging into Brian's criminal record, where the crimes are messier than Peter's antics, the punishments are heavier than Meg's teenage drama, and the jail time is longer than one of Stewie's world domination speeches. Let's get into it. Brian's most frequent instance of morally dubious behavior is child negligence. In real life, this is a major crime, but since most of Brian's interactions in the show take place with his best friend Stewie, who is a baby and is also evil, I feel like most of this was unavoidable. In Be Careful What You Fish For, he completely ignores the neglect of preschool children, including Stewie. Why, you ask? Well, it's because he finds Stewie's daycare teacher hot and tries to get with her. This also includes trying to silence Stewie from complaining about his broken arm. He goes out of his way to justify Emily's actions and only changes his mind when he finds out Miss Emily already has a boyfriend and we see Miss Emily being arrested for her neglectful actions. We're just getting started with his child abuse antics though. In Back to the Woods, in a flashback, we see Brian force Stewie to watch an obscene video called 2 Girls, 1 Cup. Yeah, you don't want to Google that, trust me.
Oh, I'm never gonna be able to eat ice cream again. Oh my god!
And in Killer Queen, he torments Stewie with the Queen album repeatedly. Stewie is terrified of the robot on the cover, who he believes killed the band members of Queen and almost commits suicide over the trauma. Brian does, however, apologize in the end, though.
Look, Stewie, I'm sorry for scaring you, all right? But come on, it's not a real robot.
At least he apologized with his last incident, though, because he couldn't even care to do that in Patriot Games, where Stewie offers Brian a free punch, and he ends up using this to terrify Stewie to the point where Stewie ends up beating himself up. Finally, in Stewie Be Goode, to teach Stewie a lesson about the dangers of drinking, he gives Stewie alcohol and gets him drunk. Later, he takes Stewie to the Drunken Clam, which is also illegal, and they both get drunk.
Was that good?
Brian drives them home drunk and causes property damage when he crashes as well.
Put this on my tab.
Now, Stewie might be a huge jerk and quite literally evil, but in the end, he's still a baby. Brian is lucky he's a dog in Quahog, because if he wasn't, he'd be guilty of not just multiple counts of child neglect and abuse, but also with supplying alcohol to minors and destroying property under the influence as well. All in all, Brian would be looking at a total of 50 years and 7 months in the big house, and he'd be paying up to $21,500 in fines. Funnily enough, Brian is also the second most sexually active character on the show, after Quagmire, of course, and has a string of relationships and affairs. He is also known for sleeping with other people's wives, including Joe's wife Bonnie, Stewie's mail-order bride, and most notoriously, is in love with Peter's wife, Lois. This obsession with Lois leads to some very devious encounters, and trigger warning, we will be talking about assault on this part of the video. In Play It Again, Brian witnessing Peter's constant mistreatment of Lois suggests a vacation to Martha's Vineyard.
Why don't you come out to Martha's Vineyard and watch me accept my award?
While Peter continues to goof around and ignore Lois, Brian takes the opportunity to spend alone time with Lois, taking her on multiple dates and even dedicating a speech for her. The episode culminates with Brian and Lois alone together watching a movie on Saturday night while Peter is yet again absent. Both are shown drinking, and Brian takes the opportunity and confesses his love to Lois. Immediately after this, he jumps on top of Lois trying to kiss her, and like the dog he is, tries humping her repeatedly, despite her pleas to stop. The ordeal is only over after Lois hits him over the head with a newspaper and kicks him out of the house. Later, when Peter finds out what happened, and Brian tells Peter he doesn't deserve Lois, the two get into a very violent bar fight, which results in them resolving their issues and apologizing to one another. Well, at least neither of them press charges. In Joe's Revenge, Brian finds another chance when he sees Principessa kneading Lois's breasts. He attempts to subtly substitute his own paws for the cat's, fondling Lois as she sleeps, but she awakens. Brian knocks her back out with a lamp and drives off in anger. Brian's most sadistic instance of his obsession with Lois takes place in Switch the Flip. To help Brian fix his life, Stewie invents a new particle interchange transporter, which will allow them to switch bodies with each other. This leads to chaos within the Griffin family when Peter and Chris get accidentally mixed up with the machine, leading to a lot of funny encounters all over Quahog, with the machine affecting everyone in town. The episode ends with Lois trying to have sex with her husband, unaware it's actually Stewie in Peter's body. Stewie, in fear, calls Brian for help, and as fate would have it, Brian ends up in Peter's body and takes his chance to have sex with Lois. Now, even with the complicated science of body swapping, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this was not cool from Brian. And this constitutes, especially considering how long Brian has been lusting after Lois, and another highly suspicious incident in Brian's past. That suspicious incident takes place in The Blind Side, where Brian gets a date with a blind girl, Kate, and they start hitting it off. Everything goes well until Brian finds out that she hates dogs, and Brian starts hiding his identity. He also starts taking advantage of her blindness to make himself look better in her eyes, faking a mugging where he pretends to save her, and tells her he's taking her on a trip to the Eiffel Tower, but it's just an escalator. With the relationship going well, Brian is forced to have dinner with Kate's parents, who aren't blind, and even with Stewie's help and some bandages, unsuccessfully tries to hide the fact that he's a dog and comes clean, leading to their breakup.
You screwed up, Brian.
Afterwards, we see Brian using a different voice to get another date with Kate, and although we don't see it, it's implied he's successful in seducing her. Again, in the real world, taking advantage of someone's disabilities like that would get you charged with assault. Another incident takes place in Scammed Yankees, where Brian's sexual misconduct takes a more sinister turn when, while trying to return a bag to one of Meg's friends, he stumbles into the high school girls' locker room, and well, I'm just gonna let the clip speak for itself. Later, he recounts to Stewie, in detail might I add, how Meg's friend Patty has a great body, and Stewie reminds him that she's in high school, which excites Brian even further.
Any waist, firm butt, great rack?
She's in high school.
I know, and she's in high school.
It's like 7 a.m., dude. Calm down.
Brian then begins trying to woo Patty by getting close to Meg and asking about her friend's interests, and later showing up at the mall and giving Patty gifts. Despite Meg's warnings to back off, Brian takes her on a date. On their date, Brian takes Patty to a romantic lookout point and starts taking off her sweater, only for Patty to be saved by the interruption of Meg, who tells her that Brian is only being nice to her to take advantage of her. Now, even with Patty's age being unspecified, Brian's actions would definitely lead to him being put on the sex offender registry. In Herpy the Love Sore, reminiscent of our Quagmire video, Brian knowingly gives Stewie herpes when they perform a ritual to become blood brothers. Although he initially denies the accusation, he later admits he had herpes and didn't tell Stewie out of embarrassment. Later, it's revealed that Brian also gave Chris herpes in the same blood brother ritual. Ouch! Knowingly exposing someone to an STI is an offense in Rhode Island. It comes with a $100 fine and 3 months of jail time, which, if you ask me, is letting someone off pretty easy. If you add all these charges up, including sexual assault, attempting to woo a minor, and knowingly spreading an STI, Brian is looking at his name in the sex offender registry, 60 years and 3 months in prison, and a $100 fine as well. Brian's next offense is nowhere near as debatable. In Road to the North Pole, Stewie and Brian travel to the North Pole to find Santa Claus. When they discover he is no longer capable of doing his job, they take things into their own hands. Setting off in Santa's sleigh, they attempt to deliver the presents themselves, but things go horribly wrong. Crash landing and breaking into their very first house, they are discovered by the family. Although Stewie is the one who knocks out the mom and dad with a baseball bat, Brian is an accomplice to all of this, and helps tackle and subdue the mother and child. This makes Brian an accomplice in breaking and entering, assault, and kidnapping, which would get Brian a hefty 62-year prison sentence. Brian really needs to reconsider a lot of things in his life, and his and Stewie's friendship is definitely one of those. Last but certainly not least, in Leggo My Meg-o, Brian and Stewie go on an action-packed mission to save Meg, who has been kidnapped in Europe. In the final action sequence, Brian shoots and kills 3 of the sex traffickers and 1 innocent man on another boat, just for the heck of it. Even if we discount the murders of the sex traffickers as self-defense, Brian still gets charged with cold-blooded first-degree murder of the innocent waiter on the other boat, which would land him in prison for life without parole. Tell it to the judge, Brian. Brian's struggles with substance abuse extend beyond alcohol, occasionally dipping into more, illicit territory. In the episode The Thin White Line, Brian gets hired at Quahog Airport as a detection dog. While working as a police officer, Brian is initially very successful due to his keen sense of smell, helping catch multiple criminals. But after a successful drug bust, he offers to take the cocaine they confiscated into evidence, and things go downhill from there.
I think you have a drug problem. A drug problem? What's this really about? Jealousy? Am I stealing your thunder, Joe? Is that it?
This leads to turbulence in his family life, an intervention, and ultimately Brian in rehab. It doesn't stop there though. In Petey IV, Brian gets a job at a suicide hotline and meets a hot new coworker. But when he fails to attract her attention, he tries to use Facebook to get to know her better, but ends up masturbating to a picture of the coworker and her mother at a funeral, getting caught in the act by the coworker herself. Yeah. Now, Brian is afraid that she'll tell on him and get him fired, so he ends up making a not-so-wise decision.
Do what I do when people don't pay their rent, plant drugs, and call the cops.
That seems like a crappy thing to do to somebody.
Well, then you're evicted.
Okay, fine.
She ends up getting arrested just as she was about to give Brian a second chance, too. Now, drug charges vary based on quantity, but in both instances, we can see he possessed at least an ounce worth of cocaine. For both his instances combined, Brian is looking at $100,000 in fines and 100 years in jail. At least Brian doesn't have to worry about getting evicted now because he'll be getting a new permanent home, his cell. Moving to crimes of a more violent nature, we see Brian get into many fights throughout the show and assault multiple individuals. In Brian in Love, one of the early seasons of the show, we see Brian hit a man with his car. When learning the man is author Dean Koontz and not Stephen King, Brian backs over him again. Yup, that's assault with a deadly weapon. And if we're being harsh, attempted murder. Sorry, Dean Koontz. I don't think you can roll out attempted murder from this one either, because in Patriot Games, we also have this incident where Brian pushes Stewie in front of a bus. We should note that this was in response to Stewie beating Brian up multiple times over the course of this episode, so hey, justified, no? In Brian Swings and Sings, Brian meets Frank Sinatra Jr. and becomes a singer, and slowly becomes an alcoholic. After another drunken night, he abandons Stewie, who he is supposed to be babysitting, and Stewie is forced to walk home alone. After Stewie loses an ear to a hungry deer, Brian gets confronted by his family, and in retaliation, he bites Peter on the arm. Now, in real life, bad dogs like that get put down. That's not the first or the last time Peter and Brian get into it though. In Once Bitten, when Peter is trying to give Brian a pill he got from the vet, he gets bitten again by a feral Brian. He doesn't escape without consequences though, and this time gets sent to obedience school for his bad behavior, where he gets brainwashed into being a good boy. In one of the most surreal episodes in Family Guy history, Stewie Is Enceinte, Stewie impregnates himself with Brian's sperm using a fertilization machine he invents. For obvious reasons, Brian is disgusted by this, and tries to kill the unborn babies by various means, including punching Stewie in the stomach. And although not shown on screen, it's implied he tries to push Stewie down some stairs too. The episode also includes this montage, which, since I was forced to watch it, it's only fair that you guys suffer with it too. In any case, punching a pregnant toddler is a really big no-no, so let's add that to the charges. All of his antics combined, with 2 cases of attempted murder and 4 cases of assault, Brian is looking at a mountain of charges. With 2 life sentences and 80 years in the slammer, Brian will be hoping he left his animalistic instincts stay in the wild, where they belong. Adding up all the crimes of Brian Griffin gets us to a grand total of 369 years and 3 months in prison, plus fines totaling $137,600. On the other hand, who's to say whether a dog can be held liable in court? What do you think about Brian Griffin's criminal record? Did I miss any of his crimes? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell for more Family Guy breakdowns and analysis.